Hi, so the issue that I'm going to be working with is the direct and indirect violence against women worldwide. And so the definition of this issue is that violence is any kind of negative action that is taken towards another person that inhibits them from realizing their development or meeting their necessities. And I feel like there are several types of violence that women are subjected to or that they sustain in a worldwide scale. So we have, for example, cultural violence that describes all these sorts of narratives and societal situations and stereotypes that are related to women around the world, and that's cultural violence. And they're also subjected to a lot of structural violence, which has to do with the institutions and the structures within the countries that are exclusive towards women, powerful spheres where policies are created that exclude women or that do not or make it much harder for them to have a role in these spheres, and as such to be able to speak for themselves and against the violence that they experience, but also the direct violence that they experience in many different contexts, which has to do with direct physical harm, Like, for example, there's a lot of undocumented domestic abuse worldwide, and ciphers and numbers from, for example, reputable institutions like the UN estimate that only about 10% of domestic abuse cases are considered in the actual statistics from the countries, because it's such a recurring issue that is not reported because of a lot of situations like, for example, fear or children or economic control or economic power over women that does not allow them to express this to their full extent, but also a lot of other direct physical violence, like, for example, like the escalating number of rapes worldwide, the escalating number of feminicides worldwide is a very concerning issue. So, the reason that I chose this global issue is because I feel like it impacts me directly. I feel like as a woman, it's not only that there's a lot of stereotypes and narratives that actively prevent me from being or having it as easy as other people in my community. But also, I feel like I have the privilege of being able to surpass these kinds of narratives through my education and through my experiences. But I feel like there's a lot of women, like really close by to my own community, that do not have this possibility, but that are also constantly subjected to direct violence. In Mexico, it's escalating every time, but also this indirect violence that manifests itself as this extreme fear of the direct violence. And so, it impacts my country and the communities within my country because, for example, like some ciphers state by the UN that every single day between 10 and 11 women are murdered in Mexico. That adds up to at least 3,650 women every single year. Not only that, but about 65 or higher percent of women are expected to have suffered or that will suffer violence in the course of their lives in Mexico. Not only that, but like 40% of these women suffered it in the last 12 months. And I think that just goes to show that these statistics are increasing and scaling exponentially each time more. And that impacts not only my life, because I feel like me and the other women in my community are constantly afraid of doing everyday things like going to school or going out into the street, and because there are areas where it's just so likely that this will happen that there's just this ridiculous amount of fear. But it also impacts the way that the people in my community and outside my community can develop. These women cannot reach their full development because there's this incredible fear and exclusion from institutions and this likelihood that they will suffer direct physical violence that is just so alarming. As my personal perspective on the issue is that it is alarming. I think I've already sort of stated this, but to me, the with this is not only the direct physical violence, but also this indirect violence that allows it to continue. Because there's this cultural violence, for example, in Mexico, that women are only good to be housekeepers or women are only good to be mothers, and they're not considered for any other kind of sphere that would allow them to have a direct impact on the policy making. And the policy making and the people in power are men who perpetuate these kinds of conduct and that don't allow women to be part of this institution so that they can materialize the change that they want to see. So I think that my personal perspective is that it's not only about stopping the direct physical violence, which has an increasing amount of urgency, but it's also about directly impacting and changing the structural and cultural violence that women are subjected to. And I feel like the reason that I have this perspective is because I've been privileged enough to have more than a single story about women in Mexico. I think that I have a balance of stories and I think that I have a balance of perspectives. I feel like this is an issue that I've always felt really close to and that I've, throughout the course of my life, taken an interest in, and I have been rewarded with being able to hear different perspectives from different women worldwide, from different women in my community. And I feel like my perspective is a combination of several different perspectives that help humanize facts. I think it's not just good enough to say between 10 and 11 women every single day are dying in Mexico, but to also understand that the impact is not just dead bodies, but the impact of that is broken families, but the impact of that is people being lonely because they lost a friend or a mother or a sister or a lover. It's that people like this fear that is just tangibly on the streets, and I feel like these kinds of humanization of facts shape my perspective through being able to understand how other people live the same conflict. Because while violence against women is something that is a trend worldwide, it's experienced and it materializes different for different people in different contexts. And I think that this is what helps shape my perspective. And then which elements of my identity have shaped this perspective? I think that above all, like my determination to make a change has shaped this perspective, because I don't think it's good enough to just read the facts and skip over them. I think that because we have to strive to not only protect women from direct physical violence but also from other types of indirect violence, the determination to make a change has contributed to my perspective. But also, my love for travel and for meeting and connecting with other people has allowed me to shape my perspective through the thing that I was mentioning, like meeting other people and understanding how similar people to me around the world experience the same conflict differently have shaped this perspective. And it comes from this love of connecting with other people that is also manifested as this love to make a change for other people, because when you connect with someone, you want them to be better and you want them to not have to be afraid, because when you feel that fear, someone else's fear firsthand, even while we're both women, I specifically just don't want anyone, even if I've never met them, to feel this fear that I have connected with. And I feel like this issue and the way that we perceive it is often affected by this cultural violence that I was mentioning. Things like judgments and beliefs and stereotypes and narratives that justify direct violence towards women, or that try to skip over it or say that it's not as important as other issues worldwide. And I feel like that affects everyone's perspective of the issue, not just my own. And I think that this is personally related to how I view the issue, not just from connecting with others, but from the perspective that I had already mentioned, where for me it's really important that the issue is taking into consideration seriously, not just in terms of fixing direct physical harm and domestic abuse situations, but also in terms of changing the structures of the country and the narratives within the country, so that this issue is taken a lot more seriously. And that when these narratives are broken with, then it's harder for people to justify these violence. Thank you.